Hi there. This is a presentation that I made earlier this year for the annual Spark Effects conference. I was asked to be part of the Meet the Masters compositing panel. 5 of us worked together to produce a series of presentations called From V1 to Done, in which we tried to cover the whole range of skills that you might need as a compositor to get your shot complete. Rather than the whole series being just about how to do things in Nuke, I decided to produce 2 short presentations that concentrated on the softer skills of compositing. In this part, Steps to Success, I talk about the process that a shot goes through during a production, and I discuss how you might want to break down the tasks that you'll need to do to complete the shot, and how you might manage your time to try and get your work done as efficiently as possible, so that you can have enough time to make the shot look as good as you can. I'm sure some of you will have heard of the 20-80 rule. It's the idea that it usually takes us about 20% of the time to get a shot 80% done. And then we spend the other 80% of our time doing all the little fiddly details that get the shot the last 20% of the way to completion. Personally, I think sometimes we get bogged down in all the little details of a shot that we often forget that most of the viewers will only ever see it once in the middle of a sequence. This isn't to say that those little details aren't important, but that we tend to spend a lot of time polishing a shot well after the point where it could totally work in the edit. And this often comes at the expense of shots that haven't even been started yet. I think generally production should get all the shots in a show to an acceptable level well before the deadline, and then we could spend all the remaining time going back and adding as much polish and sparkle as we can without being under as much pressure. Unfortunately, that's not so realistic, but we, as individual artists, can try to work that way on a personal level. Artists can sometimes get caught up in particular little details of a shot that they think are really important or interesting, and can sometimes ignore other more fundamental issues that are ultimately more crucial to the success of the shot. I think it's important to work on a shot in a methodical way that will get us to the point where the shots are acceptable as quickly as possible, and then we can spend any extra time after that polishing it and add all the cool details and sparkle that will take it from acceptable to amazing. But once you get to that acceptable point, you should feel okay if it's sent to the client at any moment. It's also important to remember that as compositors, a big part of our role is being an administrator. We are receiving elements from all the other departments on the project, and it's often down to us to flag things that are wrong or missing. The production team do this too, but sometimes things will fall through the cracks, and sometimes errors aren't obvious until you start compositing with the pieces. So we need to be on top of this, and we need to be aware that sometimes it could take other departments days to be able to get a new version to us. So we need to flag issues as soon as we can. Putting our shots together in a methodical way helps us get feedback to the other departments in a timely fashion. So in this presentation, I'm going to take you through the main steps or checkpoints that I think you should consider when you're putting your shot together, and the order in which you should probably consider doing them. This will just be a general guide. Things won't always work out this way in the exact order, but sometimes there are so many things that you need to do on a shot, it can be pretty daunting, and you need some kind of a thought process that can help you decide where to start or what you should work on next. The first thing you should do when you start a new shot is to check the shot specs and the brief. This should give you a bunch of information about the shot that include things like the format and the frame range, the description of what's expected from the visual effects, what exactly is the client paying for. Sometimes there are things in your shot that you think should be fixed but either doesn't bother the client, aren't in the budget, or are being done by someone else. Then there's the approach that's been decided upon during the bidding. Are you expected to do a particular effect in comp? Or will there be a CG render or an effects sim or a matte painting? If you're working at a VFX studio with any kind of a pipeline, then a lot of this stuff like the frame range and the format should be set up for you when you open Nuke in the shot environment, but it's always worth double checking. And the VFX brief or description is often included in a field in Shotgun. Then watch the shot in the sequence. You should have a cut reference so you can see the shot in context. This will help you see what is important and what the shot should look like. Then load up the edit reference for the shot. The edit reference often includes pre or post Fizz VFX that you'll be expected to match. If there's no pre or post Fizz, then the edit reference still might include an indication of any timings of things like bullet hits or beats of action that you'll have to match to. The edit ref will also show you which plate, if there are multiple plates, will be your main plate, and any repos or retimes that have been applied to it. Doing all of this when you start a new shot should be obvious, but But even now, sometimes when I'm keen to get started on a new shot, I forget to look it all up at the beginning and only discover that there's a retime when the CG doesn't line up with my plate 2 days later. The next step is putting together our first version, and this is where we spend a lot of time doing our admin. What goes in your first version depends on what you have from the other departments already. If you're early on in the show, you might not have any CG elements or effects renders or matte paintings to use yet. If that's the case, you can still get things ready for when they show up. If your shot has a repo or a retime on it, you should make sure you set these up to match the edit reference, and then daily a version of your plate with just these applied so editorial can confirm your adjustments. Even if you have other elements ready, if you have a retime, it might be best to daily a version of your retime on its own so it's easy for editorial to approve it without the other distractions. Don't spend any time trying to clean up retime artifacts before editorial have confirmed that you've matched the reference correctly. In fact, this should be a general rule for anything. If you need another department to confirm something that you've done, get a version out there as quickly as possible before you spend time tweaking things. Depending on how the shot is going to be done, you might need to send the retime or the repo data to other departments so that they can be baked into CG renders or the match move camera. Other things you can do while you're waiting for elements include running a denoise version of your plate, starting your keying but remembering that whatever is going behind your plate will have a big effect on the edges and the D-spill, so don't get too hung up on those yet, just concentrate on getting a good matte. Pulling any paint, roto, cameras or lens distortion into your script that have already been done. Doing any tracking that you know you'll need. And doing any paint out if there aren't any specific paint tasks yet. If you do have the other elements ready, then you can start putting your shot together, but broad strokes first. If there's a template for your sequence or an effect, grab that. Get all the pieces into your shot. Get the general layering working. Throw your roto in there. Set up your projections. Pull a quick key. Do a quick black level and exposure adjustment. But don't start worrying about tweaking the edges of your roto yet. Don't get obsessed with your D-spill yet. Don't start breaking out every AOV of your render. Sometimes your supervisor will actually want to see how the raw renders look in your shot before you start messing with them. Check things against the dailies from the other departments to make sure they look right. Read the last round of notes from the last lighting submission, and if it all looks reasonable, hit render. And if everything seems to be working, show it. If things don't look like they're working as they should, and you've checked the notes and the dailies from the other departments and you can't figure out what's wrong, show that too. I find that in a shot with a lot of different elements and loads of notes from loads of departments flying around, my first version is usually, here are all the pieces that I have, and I think they're working. Are they in the right place? Is this okay? There's no point in spending half a day grading CG renders only for the supervisors to tell you that the lighting direction is all wrong and things will completely change tomorrow, or for you to start adding dust elements around the feet of your CG monster only to find out that the animation hasn't even been approved yet. Once you have all the main elements of your shot in place, you can start making them all work together. But you still want to fix all the big general issues before you get stuck into noodling subtle details. Some of the big issues could include getting the exposure of all the elements balanced, getting the color temperatures between all the elements balanced, getting the depth of field working, updating new renders as they come in, and addressing notes from previous reviews. Now, the preference of your supervisor and leads and the stage of the show you are at will affect how often you need to daily your work. But if the project is in full swing and they're hoping to final your shot soon, it's likely that you'll need to show a new version of your shot every day. This doesn't mean that they'll expect a perfect version of your shot every day, they just want to see progress. Hit all the big obvious notes and make as many of the broad adjustments as you can, and then spend the rest of your time available working on the smaller details like fixing up some edges or improving your key, or working on some more localized color adjustments. All of these tasks can be ongoing in any spare time you have while you're waiting for new CG renders or updates from other departments. If you haven't had new renders for a few days, or you're still trying to address specific notes and the production team isn't panicking yet, you might not need to daily a new version for every review session, and you can just keep working away. But this will depend on how the project is going and if the supervisor wants to see updates. When it is time to show your shot in dailies, submit a version of wherever you're at with these tasks. And when you introduce your shot, or in the submission notes, just say something like, I'm still working on the key, and the supervisor will know that they don't need to make notes on that for now. As your shot progresses, the notes from your supervisor will probably start getting more and more specific. The general look of the shot will become more or less locked in, and now is the time to start dealing with the details. This is when you should start noodling those little edges, the specific localized lighting on the CG, the little blooms on the highlights, and tidying up your key. Most of your time now will be spent on the little things. If you've been slowly chipping away at this stuff as you go, then that's great. If not, now's the time to put on your headphones and spend some quality time with Nuke. It's at this point that your shot should start looking like it could actually be used in the final project if they took it off you right now and sent it to the client. Towards the end of the project, when everything starts to get finaled and the deadline is looming, review sessions will become more and more regular, often several times a day, and sometimes they even become rolling reviews where the supervisors never really leave the review suite and you can submit a shot whenever it's ready and they'll review it as soon as they can. At this point, the notes will probably become super specific. Maybe it's one particular pop on an edge on a specific frame, or maybe it's a single highlight ping on the render that needs to come down half a stop. Hit these notes as quickly as possible and submit a new version as soon as you can, without making any other changes to the shot. They will usually be expecting to see the shot look identical to what they just saw, but with the fixes on top. If at this late stage you do suddenly have an idea that you think will improve the shot, then maybe this is the time to do an alternative version. Hit the notes that were asked for and publish that version, and then add your new idea to a second version and submit that. This way, if they don't like the addition, they still have the fix that they asked for, but if they do like the extra flourish, then you've already hit the notes too. Depending on the company, the supervisor, and the production setup, often when the supervisor says final in the review suite, they really mean, this is creatively approved, I like how it looks, but it doesn't necessarily mean, this is ready to send to the client. Often there is a separate tech check process, usually done by the compositing supervisor or one of the leads. Here, they will scrutinize the shot at their desk, zooming into the edges, checking each individual channel, checking the grain, exposing up and down to check the shadow areas and the super bright highlights. Sometimes the delivery deadline for these tech finals is different to the creative finals, so you need to talk to your coordinator or producer to know if it's more important to hit these notes or to start working on your next shot. But these tech notes are usually things you can work on in the gaps between waiting for other renders or feedback on other shots. When you're working on the tech notes, it's important to remember that the shot was already creatively approved, so you need to make sure that you fix the issues without changing the look of the shot. It's important to keep a copy of the version that was finaled in your script and constantly compare your work against it to make sure you haven't changed anything that you shouldn't have. But once you get your tech check approved, hopefully you never have to open this script again, unless of course you've got to package it for stereo. So I hope you can see how it's important to have a methodical process when you're putting your shots together. This should help you get to that 80% complete mark quicker and give you more time to spend on that last 20% of the polishing. Working in a logical order will also help you build a more logical script, which in turn should be easier to work with, more flexible to make changes in, and probably be more efficient to render too. Now these steps aren't set in concrete. Things will change depending on the project and the company that you're at and the team that you're working with, but in general, remember the following. Get the details of your shot locked down and approved as soon as you can. Make sure that you have all the correct elements in your shot as things start coming through from the other departments. Remember that it might take a long time for other departments to make changes, and if you have any questions or issues with things coming from other departments, daily a version of your shot with the current elements as soon as you can so that the whole team can see the issue. Start with the broad strokes and then start working down to the smaller details as the big pieces fall into place. Use your time wisely. If your new renders aren't going to be ready until tomorrow, maybe now's the time to get stuck into that key. Remember that you might have several shots on the go at once, and you need to think about all of this in the context of all of your targets. Maybe spending an afternoon on the key of one shot so it can be finaled this week is more important than getting a first version of another shot ready if there won't be any renders for that shot for another week. If you're not sure which is more important, ask production. Communicate with the rest of your team. If your shot is due to be sent to the client on Friday, but you have concerns about how much you have left to do on the shot, speak to the production as soon as you can. They would rather know about it on Tuesday morning than Friday afternoon. I hope you find this little presentation useful, and I hope that some of the tips in here can help you get your shot done a little bit quicker and with a little bit less stress. Thanks for watching.